Okay, so before I hand this over to Linda, I just want to tell you a little bit about Linda, Tracy, and Lina. Linda Poole joined NCAT in March 2021 as an ag specialist focused on regenerative grazing practices. Childhood adventures on her family's ranch in eastern Washington led to a deep love of working wildlands where people nurture nature to sustainably produce wholesome food, clean water, and havens for animals both wild and domestic, and abiding beauty. Linda has a Master of Science in Wildlife Ecology from Oregon State University. She spent over 30 years managing large cattle ranches to enhance biodiversity and rural resilience. Linda raises crossbred fine wool sheep, using them to restore vitality to a 320-acre prairie homestead in north central Montana. Tracy Mumma has worked with NCAT since 1999, doing both sustainable communities and sustainable agriculture work. She works on the publications team, editing and producing ATRA publications. She also posts daily news, events, and funding opportunities to the ATRA website and writes and produces the ATRA Weekly Harvest e-newsletter. Tracy is part of NCAT's livestock team and has written and collaborated on several publications on topics such as draft animal power, small ruminants, and grazing. She and her family own and operate a small diversified livestock farm in Montana, producing grass-fed beef and lamb through regenerative grazing practices. Lina Sturman grew up on her family's small diversified farm in western Montana, helping with a variety of livestock. She's a 16-year-old homeschool student who is extremely active in 4-H, showing sheep, goats, rabbits, poultry, and dogs, as well as participating in leadership activities. She is interested in range management and competes annually at Montana Range Days. In 2023, she attended the Society for Range Management's High School Youth Forum. For the past year, she's been offering weed management services in her neighborhood with a flock of rotationally grazed Katahdin hair sheep. And Linda, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Holly. On behalf of all three of us from NCAT and the Mumma family, I want to say thank you to the Quivira Coalition and to you all as new agrarians for inviting us to make a presentation to you today. We are such big fans of the work that you all do. And we were laughing before we let everybody in the room. You know, we've got a 16-year-old in the room, but she's not a new agrarian. Lina is a young agrarian. She's been doing this for 16 years. But what I am so excited about is however long people have been in agriculture, the chance to contribute, to learn, and to help build a better world through agriculture. So thanks for having us. Next slide, please. Oh, there, it's working. Okay, so just to kind of let you know where we're going, goofy name, NCAT. So we'll talk about who Tracy and I work for. We'll do like a jet plane, 30,000 feet elevation zoom over sheep and goats and the whole general idea of small ruminant agriculture. At the time, letting you know that you can always dig deeper. Quivira has a lot of information, NCAT has tons of it. Tracy will cover multi-species grazing. Lina will talk about her young agrarian business. And after that, what we'd really like to do is for everybody to turn on their screens and let's just talk about this. You know, why are you interested? What's standing in your way? What excites you about the idea or this topic that we're talking about? For me, the excitement is the idea of, having grown up in agriculture myself with cattle and with horses, coming to the realization that in the landscape that I'm in, small ruminants are a really good fit. And small ruminants are really important for creating a vibrant future for the people who call my part of the world home. And my part of the world is most of the Western US. I've worked in the dry parts of the Western US for too many years now. Next slide, please. So NCAT is a national nonprofit that has two kind of arms. One is a sustainable agriculture arm, and the other is sustainable energy. And Tracy and I work for the agriculture side, which is called ATRA. I'm not even going to go into what the acronym is because it's goofy, but people know us as kind of the place you go to get online information about sustainable agriculture. We have a chat line people can come to. We have a forum where people can find us 24/7 and post questions or post information. We recognize in NCAT that we learn better together. We are not the experts so much as we are experts in finding experts and elevating the information that they have. And so that's my first caveat about what I'll be talking about today with sheep and goats. I'm not an expert, but I have the blessing to get to talk to a lot of people who are experts in this from all over, and I'll be sharing some of their information. Next, please. We work through several other hats, and one is Arm to Farm, which is a program for veterans who come back and want to go into farming. Excellent program. I spend most of my time working for a program called Soil for Water. I've just got an error notice from Zoom. Am I still on there?
Yep, I think you're good, Linda.
Yeah.
Good. It just told me I was kicked out. It's like, really?
Oh, weird. I think you're good.
Great. I guess I shouldn't have said that I work for Soil for Water, but it is an exciting program where we're talking about building climate resilience. What do we do about agriculture in a water scarce future, which is pretty exciting. And then another exciting program of NCAT right now is the Agri-Solar Clearinghouse and the idea of solar grazing, grazing underneath solar panels. So you can find all these things on the web. Next, please. But let's get to the main topic of tonight, and kind of this slide is my version of what I keep in front of my mind. That this is what I give myself a report card on all the time. And everything that I do has to begin with a plan. What do I want to achieve? So I have to have a plan. And if I compromise on that plan, I will compromise on the outcome. So you get what you settle for. It always works for me to stay in line with the natural abilities of my land, the seasons, the water that I have. If I don't do that, animals suffer or my bank account suffers, and I just don't have as much fun, which is really important. Probably of the shepherds that I've talked to, they have talked about the 3 Ps, parasites, predators, and profit, as determinants of whether you're going to make it with small ruminants. And because we're NCAT and we think about the soil and the plants and the whole idea of capturing photosynthesis in a way that allows us to feed the world and take care of our climate, we're going to talk about pasture too. And adaptive management is always in the front of my mind because there's no way to know what we don't know. And that's not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem for me is when I think I know something and I'm wrong. That costs money and it keeps me from advancing. So I'll just go into these things a little bit more as we go to the next slide, please. Dale Veseth. So Matt will know Dale from his time up here. Dale is somebody that I spent a lot of time with when I managed the Matador Ranch for the Nature Conservancy. And I love how he can put so much into so few words and, plan, monitor, learn, partner, and most importantly, take care of the land and of each other. And that's the underpinning for everything that's on here. Whenever I get lost and I'm thinking about, should I do that, this, or do that? Should I sell some of these sheep, or shall I buy some more hay to make it through the drought? This little mantra can be very helpful for thinking about how to go forward, but it starts with the plan. I recommend going through a holistic management planning process if you haven't already done it. Ranching for profit is another great place to build your first plan, if you can afford it. Next slide, please. So back to you get what you settle for. So these are pictures of my landscape. It's been 113 degrees in the summer in the left-hand side there. It was 74 below zero last winter. You missed a good one, Matt. It was really something. It was like 40, 48 or 49 below plus the wind chill. And so, I have settled for living in a place like this because it's a place where I could afford the land. But what I really am challenged to do is to come up with livestock and a way to manage that livestock that works in that context. Next, please. So what I found is that nature has a pattern that if we follow as closely as we can, it's going to mitigate risk, it's going to save money, and it's going to be easier to do. So the animals that most easily deal with this temperature fluctuation are bison. I only have 320 acres. I'm not going to be raising bison. And so the question to ask before you go down into, I want to raise small ruminants, or which small ruminants to raise. Think about your climate, think about your plants that you have, the seasonality of it. What do you have for water sources, or could you develop? Do you have shelter? Do you have animals that need shelter? Do you have fences? My neighbors went to hair sheep this last year. And, when it was 74 below zero, my wool sheep were out being sheep and the hair sheep were balled up in the barn because it was cold. I mean, it was really cold. And so trying to think about these things will save us money. Also think about how you're going to pay for this. What products are you going to sell? What markets do you have access to? And what I hear from the shepherds that I talk to in my podcast series called She's Raising Sheep, every one of them says, make sure that you are raising animals that make you happy, that you smile when you get up in the morning so that you can go see them. Next slide, please. So if you've decided that, okay, I'm going to do small ruminants, the choices are myriad. Over 1,200 different breeds of sheep, over 200 breeds of goat. How do you decide? And there's all these little categories that you could look at, but there's overlap between them. But basically, are you mostly interested in the fiber or in the meat or in the dairy? And what combination of those things might you be interested in? Next, please. So once you've decided a breed, then you're going to be buying some animals. And here's something that another common thing that I hear is I ask people, how did you get into sheep? And many of them have these horrible stories of, well, I went to Craigslist and I bought some sheep, or I went to the auction barn and I bought some sheep. And what they bought was they bought diseases and they bought culls and they bought a bunch of problems. So my advice would be, if you're just getting started, find somebody who is raising the types of animals that you want to raise nearby where you're at. And if they will mentor you in that, then you're set for success. Here's another place not to buy sheep, and that is the show ring, unless you are going to raise show sheep. These big meaty show sheep club lambs, they cost a lot of money. They take a lot of feed. They are not set for production agriculture. And so that's kind of my, the the trail I trot down. It's all about production agriculture in a grass-based system. And so I want to make sure they're healthy. I want to make sure they're sound. They need to fit my context. Easy does it is important. It is so simple to get wowed by, oh my gosh, that is the most beautiful buck I've ever seen, you know, and he's shining, he looks great. He's also been raised on all sorts of grain and he's been groomed, and don't go for the extremes. Dr. David Fernandez, who is part of our Soil for Water network, I talked with him about selecting livestock, and he said the number one thing to select for is middle of the road lambing and calving and birthing ease. That takes care of so many other problems. So select for that when you start, and then cull hard. And back to the idea of you get what you settle for. I don't give any second chances to livestock. Every female on my place has to breed every year, or I sell them. And I cry sometimes because mine all have names, but I sell them, they go. And if what you're trying to do is to always adapt your animals to be a better fit, more profitable, easier care, then what you're going to be doing is observing and practicing adaptive management all the way through. Next slide, please. I'm going to kind of skip through this nutrition part. It is absolutely essential. It's so essential that what I would like people to do for grazing management and the idea of ruminant nutrition is go to the ATRA website, and we have some of the resources posted at the end of this presentation, and you'll be able to find those there. But nutrition really does matter. And given that, next slide, please. Saying that we are, you know, I'm at least a grass-based system. I think Tracy is too. One thing that's really helpful when you're trying to get started is to make, I just call these, you know, wheels. And so one is the cycle of the land, and the other is the cycle of the sheep. And then if you were to take those two cycles and overlay them and twist them around back and forth, what you'll do is you'll eventually come up with the way to manage your livestock that you've chosen so that it's most in tune with the land that you have. And again, that's about reducing risk, increasing enjoyment, and making more money. Next, please. If you're not already familiar with Understanding Ag and Alan Williams and Alejandro Carrillo and Ray Archuleta and the crew there, Gabe Brown, I would encourage you to go to understandingag.com. I think that they have the best way of looking at the 6 principles of soil health. Again, I don't know how many webinars NCAT has recorded and blogs we have, but we have dozens of them on soil health, and I can't do it justice. So I would start by looking at 634, which is what you see here for Understanding Ag on their fact sheets, and then come to ATRA. The next slide, please. What it boils down to is we are trying to capture the sun and turn that sun into grass, and then the grass feeds the soil, and then soil feeds the plants, and the plants feed the animal, and we create nutrient dense meat and beautiful fiber. And it is easy to do, and it's easy to do wrong. And the intricacies of this are so vast I can't cover it here, but what is important, I think, to know is there's a point where grass is ready to be grazed. And this time of year in Montana, you want to have at least 4 leaves up before you go in, and then you don't want to take it down below about 3. But the short story is if you graze too early, you don't get to graze as much because you cut down the productivity of the plant. And it matters to the soil and to the plant. It doesn't really matter how much you take. It matters how much you leave to keep the soil covered, to keep the plants healthy. and to build your soil biology. And one of the keys to that, of building soil biology, is the idea that Tracy's going to talk about with mob grazing, moving animals before they take a second bite out of a plant when it's growing. With small ruminants, parasites are a huge issue. And so sometimes your grass can be grown back up to the place where it would be safe to graze it again, but you're not going to come back in, because that's the precise point when the barber pole worm or other parasites, they are in your sheep's intestinal system. There's droppings, they hatch, the larvae crawl up the blades of the grass, and the sheep eat the grass. And for a long time, we talked about, oh, you can bring your livestock back in 30 or 35 days. Dave Scott, who used to work for NCAT, has some wonderful stories about how hard it was to learn to not come back for at least 45 days. And that's going to depend upon the system that you're in. I like little sayings that I can put my head around. And so these, the R's at the bottom. If I wait until the grass is ready to be grazed, and if I leave enough residue on the ground when I take my livestock out, I have set it up for rapid recovery, and I'll be able to come back sooner. Next, please. Parasites, another huge big thing. I'm going to stop talking here very quickly because I want Tracy and Lina to have more time. The idea of parasites, you can, by the way you manage your pasture, by having a diversity of different types of plants in your pasture, by managing the genetics and the epigenetics of your livestock, the nutritional plane of the livestock, by monitoring their I scores, FAMACHA scores, or fecal egg counts, you can get on top of this. There are expected breeding values, so there are ways with some breeds of sheep to be able to tell whether they're going to be parasite resistant. But everybody that I know has had some type of a run-in with parasites, and check with us at ATRA and we can get you some help with that. Next, please. And the other thing that we all have trouble with when we have sheep and goats is predators. And I told you all my sheep have names, and I can't do what I did with Monkey here. He lived in the house for a while. He was an early bum, and he was safe from predation, but he's probably the only sheep on the place that was safe from predation before I got my livestock guardian dogs. Livestock guardian dogs are not for everyone. I couldn't ranch without them. There are people that can't get along with them. Again, do your research and talk to some people. There are other alternatives. You can herd your sheep and stay with them, and predators stay away. You can night pen. You can have them out during the day, bring them in at night. Electronet, rather than using electric wire, is usually a lot better deal, because coyotes and wolves can't dive through electronet. Mixed herds, where I've run my horse and cattle in with my sheep, and that helps. Better equipped livestock, it's something we don't talk about very much, but one of the reasons I raise fine wool sheep is they flock tightly, and my guardian dogs can keep them safe. I had some primitive sheep, some Shetlands and some Icelandics, and my guard dogs finally ran them off because they wouldn't stay together, and the guard dogs were running their legs off trying to keep them safe. And so they had to live in the corral while the rest of the sheep went out and were protected. So next slide, just to wrap it up. Tracy and I realized that we are at opposite ends of the shepherding spectrum. I'm the helicopter mom. I'm lambing right now. I sleep in the barn. I check those sheep every 90 minutes, day and night, for 3 weeks. And I am trying to come up with sheep that are as adapted to this place as the deer and the antelope are. But I can't stand to see an animal suffer. And I'm doing all sorts of crossbreeding. So first of all, I'm excited to see what comes out of the sheep. Who knows what it's going to look like this time? And the other thing is I want to be there and I will help them and I will give them antibiotics if something goes wrong. I will deworm something if it needs it. But all those things that need help, back to the idea of you get what you settle for, I sell them. I count on hybrid vigor to be my main doctor and diversity of my landscape. I use lots of little experiments. I'll take a few sheep and I'll do this with them for a while and see how it works before I do it with the whole flock. And I make a lot of my money off of wool, and a lot of people lose money if they have wool on their sheep. And it's a niche market. There's a lot of work to it. But what I would offer in terms of how does this work for me, I get a 200% lamb crop. My ewes weigh about 165 pounds. I wean 2 100-pound lambs at 110 to 120 days of age. So each 165-pound ewe weans 200 pounds of lamb off of grass. I just sell them right off of the grass. I breed my ewe lambs. Anything that doesn't breed, I sell them and make a fair amount of money out of that. And the colored wool, if I fuss around and sell it by the pound, I can get $30 a pound for that wool. If I don't fuss with it and I just let them run around like regular sheep, it's worth nothing. So these are all the choices that we get to make as shepherds. So with that, I am done, and I'll let Tracy go on and talk about her approach to raising small ruminants.
Thanks. We can have the next slide. Unlike Linda, we have chosen to go with hair sheep because we are not into fussing with wool and selling wool. We wanted sheep that we did not have to shear. And we chose the Katahdin hair sheep. There are several kinds of hair sheep that are, options. Something like the Barbados sheep are smaller and a little flightier. We chose the Katahdin because they're a little bit bigger and have a calm disposition, and they have a cute smiley face, and they make us happy to go out and see them every day. Katahdins come in a bunch of colors, and it doesn't really matter because their hair just falls off. It's kind of a coarse, bristly hair. There are 3 different types of coat that Katahdin can have. One that just sheds off all the way off and has a short coat. Others have a coat that sheds partially, and then there's some that kind of retain some of their coat, which is less desirable. But if you're not concerned about selling it, it doesn't really matter unless it affects the sheep comfort. So we have all 3 hair coat types among ours, and we have all sorts of colors, and we like spots and dots. So we've kept colors and bred for a lot of variety. One thing that we did consciously do was breed for darker noses. We started out with some sheep that had pink noses, and we found that they would get sunburned and scabby, and it led to some skin issues. And so we looked for rams with a dark nose and bred deliberately for that. So you can do with the hair sheep, you can breed for whatever color you want, whatever your priorities are. The Katahdins are smaller. I'm shocked at how much smaller they are than Linda's sheep as I hear this, because we're weaning sheep at like 60 pounds, and the adults are quite a bit smaller. So if you're selling in the commodity market, it's a little more difficult to do that with a non-standard breed. You can breed Katahdins up, and you can feed them a lot of high quality alfalfa hay, and they'll get big and they'll make the commodity weights, but that's a lot of input, and that is not the direction we chose to go. Katahdins typically have twins, all except this year when they're having singles and triplets for some odd reason. Next slide, please. We chose to go with the Katahdins because they fit in with our farm ethic. We have a small farm. It's only 44 acres. We have a small staff. It's just our immediate family. We're located in Montana's Mission Valley. We're on the Flathead Reservation. The Kootenai, Salish, and Pend d'Oreille tribes are here. We're on a private land inholding in the reservation. There's a lot of private land in this particular reservation. We have a lot of enterprises going on. We have draft horses, we have grass-fed cattle, we have meat rabbits, we have chickens that lay eggs. We have these 3 lovely ducks that wandered down our driveway and moved in. And so there's a lot going on here. And what we needed to do with our sheep was to have something that didn't require all our time and didn't require helicopter parents. Next slide, please. So we chose sheep because they were low input. They didn't require shearing. They are a breed that can pasture lamb. They don't have to be brought in for lambing. They're good pasture mothers. They lamb easily. They look after their lambs. They're good in the weather. They fit our needs. They were a breed that is known for grazing on forbs and weeds, more like a goat. And so that's what we needed, because we had super weedy pastures when we moved here. We had very abused old farmland and a lot of weeds in it. It is all irrigated pasture. I will add that in. So the pictures that you'll see, they're on irrigated pasture. We chose them to be a pasture management tool. We wanted to rehabilitate the pasture, and our goal in farming is to leave it better than we found it, to improve the land that we have. And our philosophy in the sheep was to do direct marketing with them. We decided we wouldn't go for a commodity, ship a truckload of sheep to the sale barn, that we would sell them individually. And that is what we chose to do. And it always amazes me that Linda and I live in the same state and we work for the same company and we raise sheep, and you'd think we'd be more similar, but we're really not. So the point of we wanted to put this in here just to show you that there's a big bunch of variety in this field, and you can tailor what you do and find something that works for you, that works for your goals. Next slide, please. So when we started with our sheep, we had several small paddocks, and we would just rotate between them every month or so. We'd move the sheep to a new paddock, and we were having a lot of weed problems, and we were kind of struggling to have success with this. And then about 12 years ago, we went to a workshop on rotational grazing, and which was taught by Justin Morris, who is now an employee of NCAT and our grazing specialist at NCAT. So if you have questions, you can come right to Justin and ask him at NCAT. And that inspired us to start grazing rotationally. And what we did was more what you see on the lower right-hand slide there. We do big paddocks and fence them in with electronet, and we'd move them every few days. And our philosophy at that point was sort of a take half and leave half. So we'd graze half the grass and leave half and then move on. Well, over time, we've adjusted what we've been doing, and we turned to mob grazing, which is grazing a smaller area for a shorter amount of time and really packing the animals on there. And the goal in mob grazing is to get 100,000 pounds of animal weight on the land, which is hard to do with small ruminants unless you really bunch them up. You have to really put them in a kind of a small space to get that impact and then move off of it. So we move our sheep typically once a day, and you can see our philosophy sort of changed from the take half, leave half to thirds, to take a third, trample a third, and leave a third. And the kind of grazing that we do is not necessarily the grazing where you graze all in a vegetative state, but sometimes we're grazing mature grass, sometimes we're grazing grass that is so tall you can't even see the sheep, like in this left-hand picture. And this year we've actually grazed and rotated through the winter. So you can see up here in the top picture that we were moving them even when there's snow on the ground. And the the group of sheep that were doing that, we had them divided up into 3 different breeding groups, and one was moving on the pasture even in the snow, and that's the group that actually did the best. Despite the fact that they were getting less hay, they performed best and are healthiest this spring. Okay, next slide, please. So back to direct marketing lamb. We started selling lamb, and we discovered that the market for lamb in our area for cut lamb is not all that deep. And we couldn't sell as much lamb as we could produce. So we had to get a little innovative with what we were doing, and we couldn't sell custom cut and wrap for all of our sheep. So what we sell part of our sheep as live animals. We call it a starter flock. We'll get some sheep together that are not closely related and start people out with a few ewes and a ram. We do still do custom sales, and lately we've had a larger market of religious and ethnic sales. We have immigrants in the area who want to do halal slaughter, and we let them come out to our place and do their own slaughter. And that's been a good market for us because they'll take a variety of sizes of animals, they'll take a variety of ages of animals, and it's been a good way for us to complete our sales for the year. We also do sell retail cuts. We cut and wrap and sell at the farmers market. We have been doing 3 farmers markets in our area. And we also do value added products because we found that actually is a good niche for us, that we can sell lamb bratwurst, lamb summer sausage. For a while we made lamb ham. Ground lamb is a consistent good product for us. We have a ground lamb with bacon added into it too, a lamb bacon burger. And those products have been I'd say a steady seller for us, and they have more of a year-round market, and also they're popular at the farmers market. Next slide, please. So to come to the idea of multi-species grazing, we run both sheep and cattle. We've never run all the sheep and all the cows together. And there are a couple of reasons for that, which I'll go into here in a minute. But this is sort of what we've done, is put in a couple cows with the sheep and run them together. If you can go on to the next slide. The benefits of running them together are that you get better trampling action. When I talked about the mob grazing a little bit ago, it's easier to get more weight on and to get that better trampling action of the grass to armor the soil if you have some cows in with the sheep. The cows are just heavier, and so they do a better job of trampling. The cows do provide some protection from predation. We've had less trouble with predators in a flock that has a cow in with it. And having a cow in there can help break parasite cycles if you're having issues with that. If you're doing a pure rotational grazing, that a speedy mob grazing kind of system, you have less of a parasite problem. So that hasn't been as much of a problem for us, but it can help if that's an issue for you. But there are some considerations about running them together. You might think that it would be easier to just put everything in one flock, but if you're running sheep with electronet and you intend to run cows as well, you have to have a lot more electronet to get enough space for the cows. And so that's going to be an added expense. Or if you're running cows and you want to add sheep in with them, then you're going to have to do something besides a single wire just to keep them contained. Also, there are some issues with individual animal personalities. There are just some cows that don't like sheep, and there are some rams that don't like cows, and it just might not work. So I know that there are people who do run them together, who run, Greg Judy runs sheep and cows and horses and pigs all together. But I want to encourage you not to assume that it's going to work. By all means, try it if you think it's going to be an option for you or your best option, but don't assume that the animals are going to get along and that it's going to be successful. And an illustration of that I have from our own experience is we had a lovely heifer in with a bunch of sheep, and they lived together all summer, and they were happy campers, and she protected them from predators, and got along with them just great. They were together through the winter. They managed to cooperate on the hay and share, and things went fine. Then along came lambing time, and our lovely heifer stepped on a bunch of lambs, just because you can't assume that they're going to be able to get along together, especially at times of the year that are considerations like that, like lambing. So if you're able to manage the situation and pull them apart for times of the year, then that might be something you'd want to try, but then you're going to not have your infrastructure advantage of being able to combine them. And then I also wanted to mention a little note on horses and sheep. I know that people have put them together. We've occasionally put them together and been okay, but I've also heard just terrible horror stories of horses who shake a sheep to death or pick it up and go after it. And one of my friends just this spring has had a awful experience with her neighbor's mule, which jumped the fence and attacked lambs and killed 8 lambs in a day. So I want to say, don't assume it's going to work. If you need to try it in a way that you can watch it and control it and adjust, observe and adjust, like Linda said, but just don't make assumptions. And now I'm going to turn over to Lina, who's going to talk about goats and sheep together.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so goats and sheep are probably one of the most commonly used combinations, and you might think that they get along really well because goats and sheep are pretty similar. However, if you have goats and sheep together, they're probably going to be more like 2 separate herds in one pasture. They don't really mingle together from what I've heard and from what I've seen. I've had a few goats in with a few sheep. They do have different eating habits, so it can be good to have them in the same pasture. Goats are going to be more browsers and eat more shrubs or like prickly weeds and stuff like that, where sheep are going to probably have more trampling action and eat more of the grass and forbs. Fencing concerns, goats are notoriously hard to keep in. So goats are probably going to have some training on how to respect electric fence or whatever you choose to use. And again, individual personalities also matter, whether some sheep or some goats are going to be really pushy towards your sheep and some sheep aren't going to like the goats probably. So as what's been said, just observe the personalities of the animals that you're putting together, and it might work great and it might not. So next slide. So in 2022, spring of 2022, I got the chance to work on a weed management project with my sheep. It was 20 acres of dryland pasture with lots of species of weeds, and the landowners were looking to improve the forage and improve the soil health. So I ended up bringing 19 sheep to the project and grazing there from mid-April through late August. Next slide. So one of the weeds that they had the most problems with was white top. White top is a big problem where I live in Lake County, Montana, Western Montana. It's also known as hoary cress, and it can come in 3 different species. And it's really easy to confuse with other white flowered plants. And it's also adaptable to a wide range of habitats. It mostly comes in heavily in disturbed areas such as corrals or places where you've had livestock grazing continuously, but it also is a big problem in pastures. Even if you have good management, you can really easily get white top spread there through animals, through hay, through rhizomes and like ditch weeds. And as a priority to be noxious weed and a non-native species as well. So it's a really big problem here. And this piece of land had a lot of white top, and they were looking for a way to manage that white top before it spread anymore or took more control over their pasture. Next slide. So something you need to think about before you start any weed management project, kind of like this, or start a business, doing weed management for people is what equipment you're going to need, because your equipment is going to have to go with you places and it's going to have to be good. So what we used was electric netting. That's what keeps in sheep the best in our experience. Maybe the place you going already has fencing. I've done places where there's already hard fencing up, and that works depending on the size of the pasture. You need polywire strands for stringing to the electric net. We used hose to get water from their hydrant in the landowner's yard to their stock tank. We used a solar fence charger. It was pretty small and portable, and so it was easy to bring over to the landowner's property and set up there. However, we did have some problems with it working, and so your fence charger is probably one of the most important pieces of equipment you're going to have, and you want to make sure you have the correct powered fence charger for what you need. We have a 12 joule fence charger at home, which works pretty well here. We have a lot of predators, so anything weaker than that, and you might have predator problems. You're also going to need grounding rods for the fence charger, a polywire reel to hold the wire, a stock tank, preferably something kind of portable, mineral tub, mineral, and pigtail posts. Next slide. So paddock size. As my mom mentioned earlier before, we do rotational grazing, mob grazing at our house. And this is kind of what I wanted to do there too, because that's most effective in controlling the weeds. But the paddock size has to be big enough so the sheep don't break out when pressured by predators or even the landowner's dogs. We did have that problem, but not so big that the sheep don't eat the weeds. We also had that problem. So we ended up on about 1/3 of an acre per paddock, but that is determined by a lot of different factors. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Can you go back to the slide? Yeah, thank you. So it's determined by a lot of different factors. It's determined by the forage quality in that paddock, whether that's mostly weeds or mostly grass. And it's also determined by the palatability of the weeds in that season. As the summer as it went later in the season, into the summer, the weeds become less palatable and less nutritious. And so you're gonna have to take that into consideration in how much nutrition your sheep are getting if they're in a paddock of just weeds. Okay, next slide. Okay. So your landowner goals are really important, and it's really important to work with your landowners for that goals and understand those goals, whether that's a short-term mowing project. That's where we have part of our sheep flock right now, where the landowners just want their grass grazed down for the year because they don't have any animals, and even because they like to see the sheep grazing out there, or all the way to long-term, which is going to be soil health. And somewhere in the middle is probably like pasture forage quality. And these projects are going to take probably multiple years to complete, or just ongoing projects. And that they're kind of fun because you can really see results happening on those projects and get invited back year after year. Next slide. Probably one of the most important parts of having a weed management business is landowner communication. Make sure your goals and the landowner's goals are consistent. So I just kind of wanted I wanted business, and I wanted a place for the sheep to graze over the summer. And so as long as they're getting food, that's good for me. And they wanted those sheep to be grazing the weeds there. And so make sure you have the same goals. Discuss what are your responsibilities and what are their responsibilities. We came to an arrangement with these landowners on they would check the water tanks every day, because we weren't coming to check the sheep every day. They were staying in the same paddock for like 2 or 3 days, but they needed water and sometimes mineral in between. And since the landowners were willing to do that, that was really nice because we didn't have to make the drive over to that property every day. And then make clear payment arrangements. What we decided on for the first year is they buy the equipment and then we would bring the sheep over. And that was the first year. And then Sometimes it's as simple as you're getting free grazing area for your livestock and they're getting free weed control. Sometimes it's going to be a payment arrangement where you're grazing their weeds for them and they are paying you to graze the weeds. That's what I'll probably do in the future now that we have all the equipment. So just make sure you lay out an outline for that, preferably before you start. And so you're all on the same page there. Next slide. So the important considerations that you need to think about before you get into something like this is transportation. How are you getting your sheep to this other property? I trailered the sheep over there with help from my family. Maybe where you're taking your sheep is close enough you can herd them there either on foot or with herding dogs. And maybe you don't have a horse trailer and you need to borrow a horse trailer. That's just something to think about. Predators are another big thing to think about. I know on this piece of property, there was a creek running through at the bottom. So we had a lot of bear problems, especially in summer, and we did lose a few to bears. And so you need to think, am I bringing my best sheep over there? Hopefully not. We just brought some culls and some wethers over there because they're just as good at eating weeds as any other sheep. And we didn't want to lose any of our breeding flock to bears. And then doing what you can to prevent predators with a high-powered fence charger, maybe with a guardian dog. And then water is a consideration. We have to use a lot of garden hose to get from the hydrant out to their stock tank. Maybe you want to have a different setup for water that might be easier for you, but you need to have a plan for that. And then nutrition, kind of what I said earlier, if you're grazing a lot of weeds, they're not getting great nutrition. So you probably don't want your breeding flock over there. You want something that is pretty thrifty and can just go on a little bit less nutrition, something that's not carrying a lamb or anything or trying to feed a lamb. And then seasonal scheduling. Your weeds are going to be most palatable early in the season in like May and June before they seed out. And so making sure you get across as much land as you can in the palatability season and set back those weeds before they seed out is going to be one of the most important things. I mean, the grazing season is going to be probably through early spring through mid-fall, but the palatability of this weeds is a much shorter window. So making sure you're paying attention to that is also something to think about. Next slide. Awesome. So grazing weeds. Graze to control weeds, but be mindful not to overgraze the other forages. Well, you might want to take your weeds like down to the ground. That means you're taking your grass down to the ground as well. And that's not going to be good because the weeds are just going to come in and replace that grass. And make sure to research the palatability of the weeds. Make sure the weeds you're grazing aren't poisonous to your livestock. And grazing earlier in the season is typically better. And be patient because it'll take several grazing seasons before there's a big difference in the weed population. It can seem like, oh, but if I like use pesticides, it'll be a lot quicker of a fix. But really, if you graze your weeds, and stay consistent in your management practices, long-term, you're going to see good results with your weed management as long as you stay on top of it and keep doing it every year. So, next slide. Okay. Here's a before and after picture of one of my paddocks. You can see before there's a lot of white top growing there and some grass, and then afterwards. And you can see there's a lot of trampling. Not everything needs to be grazed. Trampling is also good and effective for setting back weeds, and it doesn't damage the grass so much either. It's good for annual weeds, especially because it'll knock down the annual weeds, and the perennial grasses will still be able to grow with not as much damage. Next slide. Okay, that's all my slides, but I will turn it back to the other presenters, and thank you.
So we have not had time to tell you everything we want to tell you because there are so many good things to tell you and there are so many good resources out there. So we're going to refer you to the ATRA website, which is packed with information. It has publications, podcasts, videos, tutorials, so much information, and you can find all of this there. We have sections, topic areas on sheep and goats. We have topic areas on grazing. We have one on meat processing that has a lot of small ruminant resources in it. And we have a section on fiber. There are other resources available as well. One that really pertains to the weed management with sheep is the Targeted Grazing Manual, and that is available from the University of Idaho on their website. The entire thing is on there, and it is very useful. Next slide, please. NCAT also has newsletters that are available if you want to be tracking what's going on in the sustainable agriculture field and advances in small ruminant and other areas of agriculture. We have the weekly harvest newsletter, which is my baby. I put it together every week and mail it out every Wednesday. That's a free newsletter, and I encourage you to just subscribe to it to keep track of all the great stuff that happens all the time. And also it features all the new releases from ATRA. We have a podcast each week, a blog each week, a new publication pretty regularly. Our other project, Soil for Water, also has a free newsletter which comes out monthly and contains things like features about producers and highlighted resources. And I encourage you to sign up for either or both of those. You can do that by going to the ATRA homepage, atra.ncat.org, and it's right on the homepage, the sign up form. Next slide, please. There's also an ATRA forum, which is online and available for anyone to read. It has great discussion from a range of participants around the country, and you can search it by topic, and you can also watch what's posting every day, so you get new information as well. I encourage you to visit that. It's easy to join up and post. You can register to post right away and get started posting if you want to be a participant, or you can just lurk around and soak up all the great information if you'd rather do that. Next slide, please. Just in case you didn't believe me about all the great resources that are on the sheep and goat topic area, I thought I'd show a picture of them. The first one is a podcast, the next is a blog, the next is a great in-depth publication. All of this is free material that is online 24/7 on the ATRA website. You're going to find this right under the topic heading right there in the middle, and this would be under livestock and then under sheep and goats. So I encourage you to check it out. There's so much more than this. There are 4, 5, 6 pages of things. I just picked a little section to give you a little feel for what some of the stuff that's there. Next slide, please. We also have a big section on grazing. As I mentioned, we have some grazing experts at NCAT, and we also have other experts on staff for sheep and goats. And I encourage you to, if you have questions after this webinar, if we by some chance do not answer all your questions tonight and you think of something else, you can call our toll-free number, or you can enter on our chat line, or you can send us a letter, and a specialist will respond to your question and help you out. Here again is some of the grazing resources we have. There are podcasts to listen to. There are publications that go in depth. There are short features on blogs. There's just so much there. I really encourage you to visit and check it out. Next slide. And if you happen to have questions later on and want to contact any of us, probably email is the best way to do so, because we are people who are not sitting on the phone, but are standing out in the field with our sheep. And so you can email any of us with a question if you might have something later on. And that sort of wraps up the prepared part of the presentation, and we would be willing to take questions now if anybody has some.
Yep, and if you don't want to talk, feel free to put it in the chat and I will do that for you.
We'd also be interested not just in questions, but your reflections on this. If you're somebody who is thinking about this, what is your thought pattern, or you you're already doing some of this. What are your reflections on what you heard here today that might be of use to the other people who are part of our group today? So we would really love to just to have you all talk to each other. You don't necessarily need to ask us questions.
I had a question for Linda.
Great.
Can you hear me all right? Okay.
Yep.
So yeah, great presentations by all of you. Really appreciate that. The question I had was relating to not grazing too early, like waiting till they're at the 4-leaf stage and that sort of thing. You know, I hear that a lot in our range management profession, and it's a valid point for sure. My concern is with folks though that have grazers that have kicked the hay habit, and they're not haying, they're grazing year round. The animals have to be somewhere, and so you know, you really can't wait until the grass gets to that 4-leaf stage to be able to graze. They have to be somewhere, and so usually what I tell them is, you know, make sure that you're not in the same pasture at the same time every year, so that there's not getting that repeated, you know, at the same time. So is that something that you would also, you know,
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It is an issue. It's one of the reasons that I jug lamb rather than pasture lamb. You know, I'm running 100 ewes on 320 acres in a place that in a good year gets 11 inches of precip. It is really dry here. And so I can't afford to set my grass back. I need to count on it. So I dry lot and I bale graze. So I have a way around that. I think that if people have a setup where they can be grazing out 12 months a year, to me, I mean, that's what wildlife do. And that's my, you know, that's what I'm trying to get towards. If I didn't have so many sheep and if I didn't live in northern Montana, I could probably do that. I think another thing that's important to go along with that is the type of pasture that works if you're lambing on pasture. And one thing that we notice with the wildlife is they don't just drop their babies anywhere. You know, we have a lot of sagebrush here, and there's been a war on sagebrush for a long time on the prairies of Montana. That sagebrush is the best lambing cover and the best soil health builder because it's catching and holding all that snow. It's a place that nurtures the grass to come up. It's a source of biodiversity. Those mama ewes, they can go in there and nose around and get on one side or another of that sagebrush. So that's another piece of it, Daniel, is just the idea of if you're not in the same pasture at the same time, that's really helpful. And then if you're careful about which pastures you're in, it will have a different type of an outcome. A lot of us up here in the northern prairies have crested wheatgrass. It was planted and it was specifically as calving pasture. That's what it was for. And, you know, it can be the bane of your existence, but it can also save you, you know, because you can graze it hard. And you can graze it that time of year and there will be residual cover left from the year before. So you don't need to necessarily have the sagebrush. So great point. A really good point. I wish I could do what you're doing and completely kick the hay habit, but I haven't made it yet. So I'm going to be learning from you all.
well, I don't own animals myself. I work with producers that do, and there are a lot of folks in Colorado here that do graze year round. And so, yeah, thanks. Great points. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you.
I'll just kick in and add on to that, in the early spring, we tend to do a flash graze, like as soon as there's grass. When it's young, when we know it can't sustain them for very long, we'll move them fast. We'll move them for just a few hours across the best areas to not set it back too far, but to give them some fresh grazing, or to combine stockpiled grass, older grass with the young grass coming up so that they get a good mix and don't get too much green grass right away.
Why don't we go with Michael, and then I've got a question in the chat after you, Michael.
Oh, okay. Hi. Hello. Thank you for all your time and expertise. I have a question regarding ewes recovering from having lambs. Do you have any suggestions for recovery food for them? They're just being fed hay as right now.
Yeah. If Linda Coffey, one of our coworkers, were here, what she would tell us would be, even though it costs money, one of the good places to spend a little money is to have your forage tested, whether they're out grazing on pasture or whether you're buying harvested forage, whether it's haylage or hay or silage. And then work with a nutritionist who can balance a ration. Because when I got started with sheep, I started with cattle and horses, and they're so different in a lot of ways. And I was overfeeding my sheep, and I was worrying about them way too much. Sheep are so thrifty, in my experience. Maybe it's the breeds of horses and the breeds of cattle versus the breeds of sheep. But I tell you, with my sheep, what I really try to do is I try to keep them on a forage-based diet with a truly balanced mineral. And I do have to make sure that I have a better plane of nutrition when they are lactating, just because the demands on them are so high. At the Maryland Sheep and Goat website, they have a nutrition balancer where you can do it yourself. But here's the other piece that's true about this is my sheep tell me what they need, and I'm the renegade, one of the renegades in NCAT, in that I herd my sheep more than I use electronet on them. And when I do let them out on pasture, which will be another couple weeks now, I intentionally let them walk through different types of, walk along the creek where there's cottonwoods and up through the sagebrush and through different types of grass. They self-medicate. They choose what they need. And Fred Provenza, if you're familiar with him, has tremendous information on how animals can do that. There's a great book, The Art and Science of Shepherding. Another one that he wrote called Nourishment. Big, thick books, lots to read. But what it boils down to is if we can let our animals have access to diverse pastures, even if it's only for 10 minutes a day, if you can walk them through, they can balance a lot of their nutrition. And I count on my sheep. So I don't know, what did Tracy and Lina do?
We try to put them on pasture right after lambing. So we time our lambing so that hopefully we're going to have pasture this year. It's running a little late, but fortunately our lambing also ran a little late, so it's working out okay. But it is a question of timing for us.
Okay, I'm going to jump in with another question. And Linda, oh, sorry, Michael, were you finished?
Oh, yeah, I just want to say thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm done. Yes.
Awesome. So our first question is from Shannon. She's an alumni of the program, and she's down in South Central Colorado. She said, "Fabulous job, you three. Thank you so much, and keep up the good work. My question is about mob grazing sheep. The operation I currently work on will be putting sheep out on pasture in a couple days. They will be mostly on grass pasture, and some of it has alfalfa mixed in. Does anyone have tips for trying out more intensive or even mob grazing safely without risking bloat?"
I have a minor tip for that, which is that if we're putting them on something really rich like alfalfa early in the spring, to toss out a straw bale with it, and the sheep, as Linda said, will balance themselves. They'll eat some straw, they'll balance themselves out. So if you're worried about that, try to do that. And that is my hot tip on that.
Yeah, and I love that, Tracy. You know, another thing is I do the same thing that you would do with a human when you're changing their diet quickly. You know, you're putting them on something that's really hot. It's like, let them have access to it for 15 minutes the first day, and maybe 45 minutes, and then maybe an hour, and then maybe 2 hours, and work them up to it. And depending upon what type of diversity you have in the field, they can self-medicate. If there's some mustard in there, you know, I'm a big fan of weedy fields because I raise sheep. You know, it's like I love having bindweed where the sheep are. When they need it, they eat it. It stays green longer than almost anything. This is interesting. So curly dock, I don't know if you know it, but it's this weedy thing that, you know, broadleaves, and it's all over. And it's so funny because when my sheep get sick, they go to the dock. Just cracks me up. It's like, who named this stuff? You know, and it's the only time they eat dock is when they have a bellyache, and they go and do this. So I don't know, when you're putting them on that feed, Shannon, if there's any way that you can get like a weedy edge of a field in there too, that can be kind of a hedge against what's going on. And worst case scenario, if you're really worried about it, bloat blocks do work. They're expensive and I don't like it. My mentors who were Basque people said that anything with molasses in it is a real mistake for sheep. Causes more problems than it solves, and bloat blocks have a lot of molasses in them. So anyway, I don't really know why that is, but they're right about everything else. So I try not to use bloat blocks.
And I've heard of, I'm curious about, do you guys offer the multiple selection mineral, or do you have some kind of, like, I've heard people will offer free choice baking soda, or free choice, I don't know, all these different fun stuff, garlic, you could put so many different ones. Do you guys do that, or do you buy one just mixed mineral?
I have a nutritionist that I use, that I send all my forage tests in, and then he sends me a base mineral mix that then we add different amounts to different times a year, different gestational periods. So that's the main mineral that I use. But if I have anything that is looking like it might bloat, I just put out baking soda. One of the people that I interviewed for the She's Raising Sheep series is Becky Weed, who is just like so smart about all this stuff. She says that the biggest thing that made a difference in the health and the profitability of her flock was to go to the mineral buffet. She has the little trailer that she pulls around with all the little units in it with a roof over it. And I look at that, and this is one place where I'm not the helicopter mom. I just have one good mineral. Yep.
Yeah, you gotta choose your battles.
Yeah. What do you guys do, Tracy?
You know, I can tell you that we did the mineral buffet for a year, and it was the biggest mistake of our lives, and I would never do it again. The sheep stood around and just ate vitamin A, and they stopped grazing. They stopped gaining any weight. They just stood around and ate mineral. And we were on the phone with Fred Provenza, and we were like, what's going on? And he said, they're just getting satiated on the mineral and they don't feel a need to go graze. And so we had an awful year. It was our least successful year ever. Plus the mineral is really expensive, I have to say. And you're having to constantly order because you're running out of one or the other. So there's a lot of shipping involved. So that did not work at all for us. And it's interesting to hear that it does for Becky Weed. We use just a combined mined mineral. And it seems to work well for us.
Nice. Have you guys had, I'm always really curious to hear about stories too of certain minerals, like certain problems in your flock, and then you'll be like, oh, we put this mineral out there and all of a sudden like that something was the missing piece. Have you ever seen anything like that?
an interesting thing that I can tell you is that when we started mob grazing, we went through a lot of mineral, and like the longer we've done it, the less mineral we're going through. I mean, they'll pick up their mineral consumption right when they lamb. They pick up a lot then and you know, consume a lot. But as we come back over areas of our pasture that are improving, they're taking less mineral out of the feeder consistently.
Yeah, when I managed the Matador Ranch for the Nature Conservancy, we had cattle from 12 different ranches there, and they all come in and they're put into, at that time, all into one great big herd. And so they're coming from a variety of places. They hit the south end. Matt will know where this is. You know, the south end is a kind of a clay pan, sagebrush, some greasewood type of a place. And you could sort the herds, you could sort the ownership by how those cattle interacted with the mineral. They were balancing up their physiology, what they had in them with that pasture, and it was different for all of them. And then, you know, after a period of time, also what we noticed is then, as you know, there was a period of time where they were all balancing themselves up, and I don't really remember how long it is, but then what happened is it mattered which pasture we put them in, whether they would eat the mineral or not. And that is definitely the case with my sheep. It's if I'm feeding irrigated meadow hay to them, this is so ironic. If I'm feeding irrigated meadow hay, they eat a lot of mineral. If I'm feeding them dry grass hay, even icky old CRP, they hardly eat mineral. And I think it's the diversity that's in the feed. And, you know, the whole thing is sheep, at least my type of sheep, they're desert adapted critters, and they don't need all that protein and all that alfalfa that, I mean, it almost works against them. So I don't know, these surprising things if we just use our eyes for our sheep, you know, it's cool.
I'll just say something on mineral. If you're looking at multi-species grazing with sheep and goats, make sure your sheep are not eating your goat mineral, because goats need a lot of copper, and copper is quite toxic to sheep. And so you have to think about how you're going to separate your minerals for sheep and goats. And then also I've seen baking soda used for goats a lot too, so I know that works.
So Lina, how do you keep it separate? I mean, we have that. I used to run some cattle in with my sheep. And so I rigged something up that the sheep couldn't get into, but how do you do it with sheep and goats so they don't eat each other?
What I ended up doing, because the sheep and goats I had together were my show sheep and my show goats, so they were quite tame, is I would just pull out the 3 goats I had and let them eat that mineral outside of the pasture and then just put them back in. That might not be the most efficient way to do it when you don't have just like 3 goats, but just figuring out some way to do that, or maybe like mixing it in with the feed that any grain you're giving your goats, or I don't know, but you just need to think about that before you give too much copper to your sheep. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, we have another question in the chat. She was saying, Anna says, could you talk about buying versus leasing land or any other options when you're just starting out? So I know this is a really big topic. We don't have a whole lot of time, but are there any just like quick thoughts about when you're just starting out, any tips for somebody?
Well, if you do weed management projects, you don't need a lot of land, obviously that much, because you can move your sheep from place to place that you have weed management jobs, and you just need a spot for the winter, and that can even be like 5-acre dry lot at your house, and you put them out grazing somewhere else as quickly as you can. So that's kind of a good option for people who are just getting into it and don't have a lot of land yet, is grazing on other people's land. You do have to be pretty flexible on your landowner's schedule though, so that would be a downside of working with other people on that.
I think one other thing that interacts with that a little bit that was really smart, the person that Matt interned with, my neighbors, the Barthelmesses, they told me when I started with sheep, make everything temporary and movable. And that way, you know, if you have the right amount of land and you have the right land, you're set up, but if you don't, you can pick up and move. And it's not exactly answering the question that you had there. And I'm sorry because, you know, it's not something that I've dealt with very much. There's a lot of good information. I would say Greg Judy and some of what he talks about is a useful place to start. And, you know, he just has a story that's much like Lina's about how to avoid having to pay for land that you're grazing on. There are costs and benefits either way. Same thing. I mean, do you even need to own the animals? You know, you can run other people's animals and custom graze them. It's done a lot. Another great resource that we haven't talked about is Steve Kenyon out of Alberta, Greener Pastures. He's fantastic on this, and the guy will not spend a penny if he can afford it. And he's found ways to, you know, for a long time he didn't own land and he didn't own cattle, and he made his living grazing other people's cattle on other people's land. And what a great way to start.
He's one of my favorite speakers.
I think he's fantastic.
One
Great.
thing I will just mention is that if you're leasing land, you have to have a big plan B. We've had so many leases go sour in the middle of the season, and suddenly something was badly wrong. The landowner sold the land and we had to be gone instantly, and we had nowhere to put the sheep. Or we had an experience where we were leasing land and the irrigation pump went out, and the landowner was like, "Oh, I don't think I'll replace it." Well, suddenly our sheep have nothing to drink. So have a plan B. If you're leasing, have some backup just in case you need it.
Great advice. I think we can squeeze in one more question if someone has one.
I have a question. Can
Go for it.
you talk about any like resources that are out there for if you were gonna pursue weed management, like how you reach those potential clients?
For me, it's just been people who come to us, and that might just be because my family has been living in this valley for a while, and everyone knows we have sheep and do, and so kind of people come to me for that. But other ways, I've seen it advertised. I've seen people do weed management jobs for fire control, and I don't know who would be to hire them to come in and graze before the fire season to take out potential fire fuels. And yeah, I guess people will kind of come to us, so I don't really know there. But can anyone?
Yeah, we have.
Sorry, lots of
No.
parks departments are looking for weed control or public land, trail maintenance, you know, contracting. So those are places to start and look for weed management opportunities.
To Kelsey, I can connect you. We have a friend, Caleb Valdez. He grazes, does a lot of custom grazing down in southwestern Colorado, and he honestly just kept an eye out and saw properties that weren't getting mowed, weren't getting grazed, or were getting hayed, and nothing was really happening there. And he just kept meeting people, making connections, and like sometimes would just go knock on their door and say, hey, like what, you know, get to know them a little bit. So I don't know. I think that can also work.
And I
Yeah.
think one more place to look, sorry.
No, go ahead.
One more place to look might be your county extension agents, because they are usually in charge of weed control. You know, it's like if you don't control your weeds up here, at least they bring somebody in and they spray nasty chemicals all over and they charge you money for it. And if you don't do that, they fine you, you know, so they know where the weeds are, and they usually know the landowner too. So that's great. I saw that Julie put in the chat about Lonnie Malmberg. I went through Ranching for Profit with Lonnie. I've talked with her a few other times since then. You know, she is always looking for young people who can work for her and get a start. And I tell you, there is nobody better and more fun to learn from than Lonnie Malmberg. She is a hoot and she's brilliant, and what a great way to get started. But don't go there unless you really like to work, because, you know, she grew up on a Wyoming ranch and she is intolerant of people who show up and want to be treated as princesses. But I don't think that's an issue. Once you've been through the new Agrarian program, you've already been sorted out for that. So, you know, if we're about at the end, I just want to say thank you again for the work that you all are doing and the hope that you offer to old people like me, that there are going to be good people on the ground going forward who understand animal agriculture, who understand the importance to rural communities, to our climate, to a livable climate, and a place where people are happy and animals are well cared for. So I just want to say thank you to you all, and I'd love to hear from you in the future if you have any questions about this stuff.
Yes, amen. Very well said.
Oh, that was a beautiful conclusion. Linda, Tracy, Lina, thank you so much for presenting all this information to us tonight, and also for all the resources that we can use moving forward. It was just a joy to work with you, and we appreciate it so, so much. I just want to remind you guys that the next new Agrarian Toolkit will be Wednesday, June 14th, and that will be titled Putting Soil Health into Practice. So we're looking forward to that. And I believe the speaker or presenters are a surprise still. So we will. Is that true, Taylor?
Yeah, we're working on them, but they're great. We've got a couple of people lined up, and I'm stoked. So yeah, we're in for a good next webinar.
So thank you for being part of this tonight. It was wonderful being together, and thank you for your questions, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank y'all.
Hi, Julie.
Holly, I just want to flag for you how many, I think there were several apprentices from Montana who were on, current apprentices. Kelsey, Carolyn, Addison, I think there was one other, and then there were at least 4 alumni. So just if we're trying to keep track of that information as far as the project.
Yeah, that's going to be for sure really good data to have. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So awesome.
Right.
Thanks, Lina. You did wonderful. It was awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It was so inspiring to have a really young person talking about their enterprise. I think that's so inspiring for our apprentices. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me to speak.
Oh, you did wonderful. Thank you so much. We learned a lot. And thank you, Tracy. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting us. It was fun.
Oh, yes, yes. I'll be in touch with you guys.
All right.
Have a good night.
Good night.